Hi everyone. Sorry that I'm having to cancel all these classes. The truth is, I really got kind of messed up in a car accident. I was the cyclist, got hit from the side by a van that didn't see a stop sign, and got a lot of damage from it. So, 4 broken ribs, um, broken pelvis, broken shoulder blade, and my clavicle I just got fixed because it was shattered into like 5 pieces. So now it's got 7 screws and a metal bar. And just recently, I got released home for recovery because for the injuries that I have, there's nothing they can really do for me in a hospital. There's no way to immobilize any of these things. So I just have to kind of be in pain and rest a lot. Um, but more relevantly for the stuff that we're doing together, I got a pretty good concussion from this collision because um, I wasn't wearing a helmet at the time I got hit and managed to break the van's windshield with my forehead. So there is some measurable impairment to me cognitively. Um, and hopefully that will sort of go away over time. And I'll be working with rehabilitation people to make sure that my recovery is as complete as possible. But one of the things that everybody told me that's going to be a part of the rehabilitation is that I need to start using my brain again. And so, okay, luckily I have the sort of job where I get to do some thinking while I work. And so even though I'm not going to be coming to Oswego, I decided to record a video to tell you the stuff that I didn't get to tell you yet, so that you could do your test 2 without me having to come there. I don't want you to do test 2 and turn it into me after spring break. That's just stretching it out for too long. But I also don't want you to do it before I got telling you the stuff that you need to know. That's why I'm making this video. Another reason, like I said, is probably a little bit therapeutic. And another reason might be, for my own purposes, a little bit diagnostic. So I honestly don't know what will happen. I am like a little bit stupider than I should be. And whether I'm going to glitch out on you as I record this, well, hopefully not. But anything can happen, so keep watching. Um, you don't have to worry about any of this personal stuff of mine. The stuff that I want you to worry about is Descartes and especially Berkeley. And what I'll say before I get to talk about Berkeley is just this. Here's how I picture the next few weeks going. I want you to turn in your second test, if you're going to turn in a second test, before break. So let's say Friday this week before midnight, turn in your answers to test number 2 and do that by email. You can use my david.horacek email at Oswego, which you'd find using the people search, although the email address that I usually use is just my last name, Horacek, at Gmail. And send me an attachment with your answers to the 4 questions about Descartes and Berkeley that were assigned for test 2. So again, that's Friday. Thursday-ish, Thursday or so, I will try to post another video in which I will introduce to you the stuff about David Hume that you need to know to kind of get some traction with the reading assignments on Hume, because once break ends, I'll do my best to hobble my way back into the classroom. We'll see how that goes. But at this point, I'm somewhat optimistic that I can do it, and I'm bored and have nothing better to do. So there's a good chance that after break, you'll actually see me in the classroom. And when you do, I want to just hit the ground running and talk about Hume. So I'll make an announcement if a second video is posted before then. I'll try to do it Wednesday or Thursday. Where we finished with Berkeley was discussing the argument for the existence of God. The way this works is that the argument for the existence of God begins with this assumption that Berkeley can establish idealism to be true. And just a reminder of what I mean by idealism. Idealism is the view that everything there is consists of minds or spirits, he likes to say, mind/spirit, and ideas, which are, of course, bits of content in minds. So that's idealism. Only minds and their ideas exist. The arguments for idealism that we've discussed so far were the sort of arguments from, say, like Occam's razor, since we have no evidence to believe that there is a material substance in addition to all our sensations, then we should just leave it off from our list of the inventory of the universe. Then there are considerations about language. Then there are considerations about what are the objects of direct experience. Remember, what do we experience directly? Berkeley's answer emphatically is ideas. Experiences are things that happen in minds, and the contents of minds are just ideas. Everybody agrees to that. So what we're experiencing when we're experiencing an apple is that we're experiencing ideas, and so apples are ideas. These arguments are a lot more subtle than what I'm giving them credit for right now, because what I'm trying to do is just give you reminders. This isn't me explaining the stuff to you. We're done with that. But here are the rest of the arguments for idealism. The rest of the arguments, the ones we didn't get to talk about together, have the following character, I suppose. Okay, you already have sufficient reasons to believe that in existence there's nothing more than minds and ideas, as I've shown in the stuff that we've discussed already. Given that, look at all of these benefits. Look at all of these happy outcomes of you coming to believe that. Another way to put this is, once you admit that there's nothing more than minds and ideas, all sorts of things that you had a hard time arguing for but wanted to believe in anyway, now you can produce really excellent arguments for those conclusions. And the most important one of these things that you're forced to believe in the circumstance of idealism being true is the existence of God. Berkeley's idea roughly goes like this, and I'll tell it roughly and then I'll be a bit more precise later. Roughly, if all there are minds and ideas, then our perceptual ideas are not being caused by some sort of an interaction with a mind-independent world. Our perceptual ideas must be caused by another mind. Okay, we've already crossed out the possibility that there's a mind-independent world which is responsible for the content of our ideas. It has to be another mind, and now we can just look at the content of those ideas and learn something about the sort of mind that produces them. The first thing that we learn is that it's not our own mind, so solipsism isn't true. We're not awesome enough to produce sensory ideas like the experiences that we have all the time. And here is why those experiences have to be produced by an infinite, all-powerful, and good mind. We've talked about this in class, but it's worth reviewing. The ideas have an infinite richness of detail, says Berkeley, that when you examine a detail of some perception, like, I'm looking at my hand, you're probably looking at my bruises, sorry about that. But you can't examine the infinite detail because the camera I'm using has a finite resolution. I don't have that problem when I'm experiencing directly stuff like my hand. And I can look at the details of the wrinkles and the details of the details, and experience never saturates the details. It's bottomless in its detail. So that's one reason to believe that the author of our experience ideas has to be an infinite being. Another reason, probably more powerful, is that our ideas, our sensory ideas, are incredibly lawful. They're just so coherent that like everything fits in with everything else. There are no miracles. In fact, it's amazing just how lawful all our sensory ideas are. Our sensory ideas are produced by a source that is clearly not making the stuff up as he goes along. Um, they're produced by a mind that's obviously got a conception, a holistic conception of the entire plan of the universe. And is keeping track of all of this infinite stuff in order to produce for us ideas that never contradict one another and are predictable. Okay? The best discussion of these arguments in anywhere in Berkeley is in the second dialogue between Hylas and Philonous. And there he says, and my empiricist book is in my office in Oswego, so I'm not going to get it till after break. So I've got a different copy of the second dialogues. So I can't tell you exactly what page number this is in your book. I'm guessing something like 259, something like that. He says, I conclude there is a mind which affects me at every moment with all the sensible perceptions, okay, which affects me at every moment with all the sensible impressions I perceive. And from the variety, order, and manner of these, I conclude that the author of them to be wise, powerful, and good beyond comprehension. Right? So variety, order, and manner of these sensible impressions I perceive. That's the argument for God. Imagine being an atheist while being an idealist. You're on the hook to explain why our sensory ideas are so unlike the dreams that we produce, which are sort of incoherent and lacking in detail and all over the place. Why does sensory experience not work like that? We'll try to tell the story about how these sensory experiences could be produced by a mind which is anything less than an infinite mind. It's not an easy story to tell. And because you can't tell that story, you basically have to admit that our sensory ideas must come from some infinite mind. And then Berkeley would tell you, yeah, you're talking about God. You've just shown that God exists just from opening your eyes. There's plenty of, there's all the evidence you need. That will do for the argument for the existence of God. Hylas himself in the dialogue was convinced by this argument. And of course, you know, it's not just Berkeley who is the only person in Europe at the time who believed that God exists. Pretty much every working intellectual had to at least say that they believed that God existed, and I think most of them really did. Locke certainly did. And Hylas, the character who's playing Locke in this book, he certainly does. So he's not, Locke or Hylas are not going to jump in and object like, oh, you're stupid, Berkeley. For your system to work, you have to believe there's a God, and who wants to do that? They're not going to object like that because they also believe in God. What Berkeley is saying, in effect, is that if God wanted to, he can make the universe really simple. You know, not create all this crap like atoms floating around and space for them to float around in. He could just produce the ideas that you're having, the sensory ideas. And minds like yours, you know, to have those ideas. But that's all he has to do. When Hylas at some point objects to Philonous and says, yeah, okay, I mean, I could see how that would work, but don't you think that God also could make mind-independent stuff? And Philonous is like, why? What would that do? And here's Hylas's suggestion. Okay. Hylas suggests, and this I remember the page number of in your text. It's like 261. Hylas suggests, well, it could work like this. Maybe instead of creating our ideas and feeding them directly into our mind by some sort of a causal chain of perception, God could instead create a physical universe, okay, create a physical universe with space, with mind-independent physical stuff floating around in space. And then once that universe is created, use that universe, that physical universe, as a tool for producing sensations in us. Okay, Hylas's suggestion was God could have just made a universe with physical stuff, and that universe would do its own thing, its own lawful thing. And one of those lawful things it would do, in following these laws of physics, would be to produce sensations in us. Presumably, God would do that so that God wouldn't have to be such a busybody and directly send sensations from his mind to ours all the time that we perceive. He could just make this instrument, a physical universe, and this instrument would do all the sensation causing in us so that God himself wouldn't have to. His instrument would do it for him. That was Hylas's suggestion. Okay? And Philonous has a really cool comeback to this. His comeback is like, listen, Hylas, I don't know how you think about God, but the way I think about God is that he's an infinite, all-powerful, perfectly good spirit, and you're trying to imagine him making some sort of a tool, well, or some sort of an instrument. Well, who makes instruments? Well, this is an especially sort of relevant and interesting question, given that I've just been pretty badly hurt in a traffic accident. Like, Berkeley's example is, would I make some sort of a sling if to move my finger? Would I make some sort of an instrument whose role it is to move my finger, when in order to move my finger, all I have to do is just move my finger? If I could just do it by will alone, I would certainly never have some sort of an instrument to produce the same effect, which I could produce just by wanting to. So, you know, like, I got issued this pretty robust cane for me to hobble around once I feel better. But I would need that instrument if I could just walk, you know? Unfortunately, I can. But God is infinite. God can do everything God wants just by wanting to. So why would an infinite being who's all-powerful need an instrument to do anything? Why would God need a crutch? You know, why would God need a tool to create ideas in us when God could just create ideas in us? It's not like it's hard. It's not like his processing power is going to overheat from all the work. He's infinite. So I thought that was an interesting argument, and an interesting argument which is targeted slightly differently from some of the other arguments that Berkeley has. This is an argument specifically for people who believe God exists already and want to explain the rest of the universe. And it's supposed to get these sorts of people to think about God as like, to think about God in this way. Just get puzzled why God would ever bother making a physical universe. I know that's the general kind of theological conception that God in 6 days made a universe that's mind-independent and physical and, you know, big banging in space or whatever. But you got to think, like, why would he bother? What's all that dead, inert material stuff there for? And, well, like, what's the goal? Just to have that stuff? He certainly doesn't need it if God's goal is to create us and have this relationship with us. That relationship could be had on the level of mind to mind, you know, minds and minds exchanging ideas. That stuff, there's no role for it. So that is really the most important benefit in Berkeley's eyes of finally admitting that idealism is true. Your arguments for the existence of God become much more elegant, much more forceful, and it makes much more sense of the idea of God's omnipotence and God's being a wise designer. That was, I suppose, number 5 on this list of arguments for idealism, which you should read, which you should recognize, because you better have it. If you don't, go to the website. Number 6. Oh, sorry. I said this was number 5, but that's not right. This argument is number 7, but it corresponds to question number 5 in the questions you might choose to answer if you're doing test number 2. So I'm trying to help you. There's another question on that list of questions that you can answer about skepticism. And this win against skepticism is another thing that Berkeley thinks is a really big deal, a really great payoff of admitting that idealism is true. In essence, he thinks that skepticism becomes impossible. The sort of skepticism we saw with Sextus Empiricus, the sort of thing that haunted Descartes and that he never did ultimately escape successfully. The sort of thing which once we hear about, we kind of don't have a comeback to it. Berkeley's like, screw that, I've got to come back to it. But the comeback only begins once we've become convinced that everything that exists are minds and ideas. So you got to buy idealism first, but once you bought it, here's what it gets you. A flawless argument against skepticism. If you look at the subtitle of 3 dialogues between Hylas and Philonous, you better say it on the next page. Okay. The design of which is plainly to demonstrate the reality and perfection of human knowledge, the incorporeal nature of the soul, and the immediate providence of a deity in opposition to skeptics and atheists. Okay, you don't have this title page in your copy, but I do. So you see who the targets are. How is he going to take out the skeptics? We see how he is going to take out the atheists. Now let's talk about the skeptics. Let me actually finish reading this because this is cool. This is a pretty long title for a book, because after everything that I've read, there's also an also, comma, to open a method for rendering the sciences more easy, useful, and compendious. Okay, here we go. The argument against skepticism. The core of the skeptical arguments we talked about when we talked about Sextus Empiricus all traded on this idea that we've got appearances, you know, appearances about what's sweet, appearances about who's friendly, appearances about which arguments are plausible, appearances about which proofs are valid, okay? These are all appearances, but in the case of all appearances, we can understand the difference between how things appear and how things are. That was the appearance-reality distinction. I probably talked about that too much for your liking, but it plays a huge role in the whole development of Greek skeptical thought. We've got our appearances, but those appearances don't have any necessary connection to reality. Reality could be something totally different. The thing that's behind the appearances might not resemble the appearances at all. That is at the core of the 10 modes in Sextus Empiricus, and that's kind of at the root of why skepticism troubles so many people. Now, check this out. Let's think about idealism. What are the appearances in idealism? The appearances in idealism at least in Berkeley's version of idealism, that is a stream of perceptual ideas caused in our minds by God. It's the reality stream, okay? That's the world as it appears to us. The world as it appears to us are the sequence of ideas immediately perceived, which are themselves caused by God. Okay, now what's reality in this scheme? Reality in the scheme is what's perceivable. Reality, in other words, are exactly the same ideas, the same perceptual ideas caused by God, which make up the appearances. In other words, in Berkeley's system, there is no difference between appearances and reality. The thing that we're describing as appearances and the thing that we're describing as reality are one and the same thing, namely ideas caused by God to appear in our minds. This wouldn't be the case if we thought that reality was somehow physical, but our appearances were somehow mental. Yeah, that leaves plenty of possibilities for the appearances to diverge from the reality. I mean, for one thing, if reality isn't mental, but the appearances are, they might not resemble at all. Berkeley doesn't have this problem because for Berkeley, reality is just the ideas. So you might say for him, reality is just the appearances. And when there is no appearance-reality gap in a system, there's no wedge for the skeptic to attack and to be like, no, it just seems to you that way, but it might not really be that way. Like, what do you mean? I just saw it. The thing that I see are ideas, and the thing that's reality are sensory ideas, namely, the thing that I see. There's no difference. It's not like reality is somehow behind what I see. Reality just is what I see. That's a sort of profound way to understand what Berkeley's philosophy is. And it's also a really great comeback to this skeptical argument. It's not a perfect comeback to the skeptical argument because you can say the skeptics had tools in addition to raising doubts about the match between how things appear and how things are. But no doubt that was a really important element in skepticism. You might ask yourself, does Berkeley think then that we can never be mistaken about reality? No, he believes there's such things as hallucinations. He believes that there's such things as dreams, and the experiences that you have when you're dreaming are not experiences of reality. But that's just because it's not God which is causing the content of your ideas when you're dreaming. It's you, right? It's the arrow going from your mind back into your mind. You're the cause of your dreams and the consumer of your dreams. When you're perceiving reality, when you're just perceiving, you're the consumer of those perceptual ideas, but God is their cause. So whenever you're perceiving, you really can't misperceive. Here's what you can do, though. You can misinterpret your perceptions. And Berkeley has to admit that ultimately our perceptual ideas get filtered and processed because they arrive in our minds like way too rich for our minds to kind of keep track of all the details that we receive. So we throw out a lot of details and focus in on salient things. And this sort of processing can sometimes mislead us. For example, we see faces in certain random images that aren't really there. That's just like a part of our human mechanism misfiring. But it's not that God is tricking us. This is what's important, is that we misinterpret the infallible information about reality that we receive from God through perception. How much of a skeptical case can you make from all of these parts? Certainly nowhere near as good a skeptical case as you could against someone like Locke, who has to somehow tell the story where, according to Locke, the real reality of apples is outside of the mind. It's mind-independent atoms that don't have any color and stuff like that. But all the information we have about them, we only have that information through our ideas about the apples. And we cross our fingers and hope that there's something in common between the reality and our ideas. Like, of course, the skeptic is going to have a field day when somebody defends a philosophy like that. Berkeley's philosophy, it's a lot more airtight than that. And so that's another benefit of being an idealist. You get to shut down the skeptic. And this is something that philosophers have been trying to do since Descartes with great gusto. And Berkeley thinks, I finally figured it out. Okay, I wish I was there with you, because right now I would ask for questions and I'm sure I would get some. But I'm not going to guess at what your questions might be. I'm just going to hope that you will find the resources to answer them. By the way, I was told that Philosophy 220 actually has one and maybe even two tutors. One of those tutors, who's officially listed for the class, is Andy Bookman, a former student of mine who got an A in my class, who graduated from Oswego with a philosophy degree and is back now doing a master's. If you register online with the tutoring center, you could get Andy Bookman, and he could go through with you a lot of these arguments and questions that I unfortunately can't go through with you because I'm not there. The second tutor, and I'm not totally sure about his eligibility, is another excellent philosophy major whose dad is one of my colleagues. The student's name is Nicholas Cox. His dad is Richard Cox. Some of you might have had him for a different philosophy class. And he's also someone who did really well in Philosophy 220 and would do a great job in helping you prepare for test 2. So even though I'm not there, you still have some resources to talk over this stuff with. And of course, you have one another. I don't want to go on too long, so I'll just say one more thing. Number 8 on this handout. Number 8 is a point about the interaction problem. It's another one of these, look at what you get once you sucked it up and became an idealist. You get a solution to this problem, which wasn't just considered a horrible problem back in the Berkeley's day, but in some ways, it's still a live problem that philosophers are still publishing about. This is the interaction problem. I'm going to introduce you to the interaction problem in a kind of historical way. The interaction problem is a problem of how mental stuff and physical stuff interact, okay? Interaction problem. And it's a problem for dualists. Of course, Locke was a dualist. Hylas, playing Locke in the dialogues, was a dualist. But the most famous dualist was Descartes, who came up with this idea of interactionistic dualism. The idea is that the mind can cause physical stuff to happen, which wouldn't have happened had the mind not gotten involved. Here's an example. I raise my hand, and I raise my hand because I wanted to. And so a physical thing, the raising of my hand, happened because of a mental event, my wanting to raise my hand. Now here's a question that many philosophers had asked. What would my hand have done if my mind hadn't made the resolution to raise it? If I lacked this volition to raise it, would my hand have gone up anyway? You might think that's an easy question, and the answer is no. the hand would have stayed put if I didn't want to raise it. But think about this. The hand is a physical object, and as a physical object, it's obeying the laws of physics. If it's moving around because that's what the laws of physics require it to do. So if the laws of physics are what governs the movement of my hand, how does the mind govern the movement of my hand? Do these two things compete? Berkeley thinks that this problem is terrible, it's just a catastrophe for every dualist, and so do many dualists. Here's what Descartes thought. Descartes thought that the mind and physical reality, that these two different substances, mental substance and physical substance, interact through some sort of causal mechanism such that the mind literally changes the state of physical matter, and those changes of the state of physical matter cause other physical changes. So literally, the mind pushes atoms around in the physical world. And philosophers who read this reacted to it with different degrees of outrage. But the most famous outraged person about this idea of interactionistic dualism, was the Princess of Bohemia. Bohemia, that's my people. Princess Elizabeth, who got a preprint of Descartes' Meditations and just really hated this idea of interactionistic dualism. And here's why she hated it. She thought that if we can take anything as fundamental, the fundamental thing we can start with is that physical stuff obeys the laws of physics. That's just what it does. If a bit of matter moves around, it's because it was caused to move around by other matter, and the causation was entirely physical causation. Okay, so it's just physical things cause other physical things, which cause other physical things, and so on. But that's just the world. The world is following the laws of physics. And she thought that if the mind now swoops in and disturbs the laws of physics, that is like creating a miracle. A violation of the laws of physics is a miracle. And she just wrote Descartes, really annoyed by this idea that Descartes would take this stupid notion seriously, that every time a volition causes an effect in the physical world, for example, when we speak, when we move deliberately, that this is a violation of the laws of physics, a violation of the laws of physics caused by our minds. She was like, no, I'd be much more likely to believe that the mind is a physical thing, physically affecting the physical world, than to think that the mind is somehow separate from the physical world, but swooping in to affect it through some spooky, miracle force. Descartes wrote her back because she was a princess and told her, listen, I don't like this either, but it's not as bad as you think, because my picture is that somewhere in the middle of our brain, there's this little organ called the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is kind of like the communications device that translates stuff in the physical world into ideas for the mind, and then volitions of the mind get translated by the pineal gland into changes of the physical state of that gland, and signals travel from that gland to other parts of the brain, which issue signals down nerves, and those signals that go down nerves like move your arm. Elizabeth wrote Descartes back and was like, look, just because you say the miracles happen in just some small organ of the brain doesn't make them not miracles. That's what I'm objecting to. I'm objecting to the idea that that thought and will is violating the laws of physics. Surely you can come up with a better philosophy than that. And Descartes didn't. Other philosophers, desperate to try to avoid this problem, reached for desperate solutions like this. So philosopher Leibniz, who would be fun to talk about, but we won't, had this idea that there are mental causation events and physical causation events, and all the mental events are caused by other mental events. All the thoughts in your mind are caused by other thoughts. All the physical events in the physical world are themselves also just caused by physical events. Here's why they seem so synced up, so that on the occasion when I want to say the sentence, my voice box produces the noises that correspond to the sentence. Why are these two separate realms that, according to Leibniz, don't interact? Why are they so nicely synced up? He said, well, it's like this. God made both of them at the same time. God made our minds, and God made the physical world. And he made both so perfectly that they never go out of sync. They're like two clocks. And those two clocks stay in sync, even though those two clocks don't communicate with one another, because their internal machinery, their internal causal machinery is so well made that they never go out of sync. So the physical world and the mental world don't interact, but are always nicely synced up because God made them so damn well at the moment of creation. Okay, Gottfried Leibniz, that was his view, and you might think, like, what kind of a desperate person would resort to a view that silly? Somebody who's really moved by this interaction problem. That's who. Well, how does Berkeley solve the interaction problem? I'm sure you can figure out by just thinking about it for a few seconds. Berkeley doesn't have to worry about an interaction problem because he doesn't worry about matter, because he doesn't think matter exists. There is no interaction between minds and bodies if you don't believe in bodies. So interaction isn't a problem. Interaction is interaction between us and God. We're minds, God's a mind, what we're exchanging is ideas. That's it. That's all the stuff I wanted to tell you about Berkeley. That's certainly all the stuff that you need to succeed on test number 2. I'm going to turn off the camera now and probably go get some rest. And Wednesday or Thursday, I'll make another announcement, hopefully with another video, something about Hume. Remember what I said at the start. If you're doing test number 2, I want your answers on Friday before midnight by email to horacek@gmail.com. If you don't get me answers by then I'll just consider you having skipped test 2, and that's fair if you haven't skipped test 1 yet. I'm not going to be in class tomorrow, which is Tuesday. I'm also not going to be in class on Thursday. Those class meetings are canceled. There's no substitute. Next time you'll see me will be after spring break. But like I said, there'll be one more video before then, probably. So I hope this was useful to you, and I wish you the best of luck with your reading, and hopefully things will go more or less smoothly once I'm able to return to classes for real. All right, thank you.